Greetings and salutations. So good to see you all and be with you again for episode 4 of season 5 of Sound Mind. I am Jay Gideon Winfrey, licensed therapist, your host, and welcome. And we're so glad to have you today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you so much for the great feedback. Thank you for the sharing. And we want to go ahead and jump into today's subject matter, which is we're going to be dealing with lust versus love, the love edition. But before, let's go over our homework. It's always important to make sure that we've done our homework per episode because we want to make certain that we're actually not just having conversation, but we're also doing the act of converting and having conversion. Okay. Now, in episode 3, when we talked about the lust aspect of lust versus love, we talked about the 7 characteristics of lust. We also talked about what the definition of lust was. Okay. So, very quickly, the 7 characteristics of lust that we spoke of was impulsiveness, recklessness, being selfish, living in the moment, being impossible to feel, chaotic, and just having something to do. Those were the 7 characteristics. And what your homework assignment was with each characteristic to ask yourself the question, when have I actually felt that I operated in these characteristics? And also, when was these characteristics actually demonstrated towards me? So it gave us an idea of what lust can look like, not just on the surface, but also some of the subtle ways that lust can sometimes manifest itself. Okay. So we want to make sure that we did our homework because everything we do here on Sound Mind Season 5 is progressive based, meaning that if we really want to get the greatest impact of where we're going, we have to make sure that we've done the work for where we've been. Okay. So go back, if you haven't done your homework, go back to episode 3 and review that episode just to make sure that we're all on point because now today we're going to be talking about the love edition of the lust versus love dynamic, or rather the psychology of lust versus love. Okay. Now, this one was one of my absolute favorite to work on and to develop because I love love. Okay. But I want to say this and be transparent. Let's just get this out in the atmosphere. God is love, period. God is love. And we live in a society that love has really been manipulated to mean different things and to look different ways. You know, one of the common expressions that you hear in social media and pop culture today is love is love. No, love is not love because love cannot sustain itself. You have to have something greater than love in order for it to be sustained. And here on Sound Mind, because we believe in allowing our theology to guide our psychology, we want to make certain that we recognize the Most High for being who He is, and God is love. Okay? So, with that being said, let's go ahead and dive in terms of the biblical aspect of things because y'all know how we get down on Sound Mind is we like to take the secular and have it blended with the sacred. Okay? So, let's look at the sacred as far as one of the most common, clearest definitions of love, and we can turn right to 1 Corinthians 13, 4 through 8. And I'm going to recite it for you because I want you to pay attention to the wording of this because I want you to be able to absorb this in your spirit. Now, 9 times out of 10, you've probably heard this a million times and read it 2 million. But what we want to do is have the actual application of it because that's how we get wisdom. Okay. So 1 Corinthians 13, 4 through 8 talks about what love is. And it says, love is patient, kind, doesn't envy, doesn't boast, isn't proud, doesn't dishonor others, doesn't seek self, isn't easily angered, keeps no record of wrongs, doesn't delight in evil, rejoices with the truth, protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres and preserves, and never fails. That's the perfect biblical backdrop of what love is. And as you see, love is not one dimensional. It has so many different definitions and so many different charges that love has. And the ironic thing is, a lot of times when we talk about love, everybody wants love, but then people oftentimes don't want to do the work that's involved with reciprocating that love. And that's typically where we sometimes get matters confused. And that's why I wanted to compare and contrast the difference between love versus lust, because sometimes we think that we're loving, but we're really lusting. And sometimes we're lusting with the intention on desiring for it to become love. And so when we look at the individual characteristics, it's going to help us to be able to really differentiate between the two so that we can have the conversations that we need to have with ourselves, but then also with others in our respective circle. As we did in episode 3, we broke down 7 characteristics of lust. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to break down the 7 characteristics of love, okay? So we had a definition that 1 Corinthians 13:4-8 gave us, but we want to look at the characteristics. And what you're going to find is there's going to be a stark contrast between what we saw with the lust characteristics and what we're going to characteristics, okay? Because what I want to be able to show us today is that there is a stark contrasting difference between lust and love, okay? So the first characteristic of love as it relates to our lust versus love um, psychology and paradigm is love is strategic and intentional, okay? Love is strategic and intentional. When we say strategic and intentional, love observes the environment, love observes that person, and love is intentional in what it does. Love isn't passive. One of the things that I've often said in my practice with my couples that I work with, and I also say this to my children, particularly my sons, I would often say to them, love is not a noun, it's a verb because it's action based. So even when you go back to 1 Corinthians 13:4-8, all those are action initiatives there. But when we talk about love being strategic and intentional, love is not something that's passive. It's not something that has an oh well attitude. It's not a I'll get to you when I get to you. Love is being so in tune with whatever is going on in that person's life that what you do is really tailored to them. Um, it's a matter of making certain that there is a representation and a motivation based upon what is the needs of the individual that we love and not just handing them anything any old kind of way, okay? So love is strategic and intentional. That's the first characteristic. But to keep the continuity of what we did in the last episode, whenever we go over characteristics, ask yourself the two-part question. When have I actually demonstrated this characteristic? But then also, when has this characteristic been demonstrated to me? So what that's going to do is provoke some insightful reflection in terms of how you have loved, if you've loved, and also if you've been loved in return. So it's going to really help us recompartmentalize and really, for the sake of being honest and transparent, after this exercise is really going to promote us being able to look and really see what love is, how we've demonstrated it, and how we've been able to receive it from others. So some of us may have to go and do some reclassifications of people in our lives based on this, because we want to be in loving relationships, not loving in concept, but loving in action, loving in actual demonstration. Okay. So the second characteristic of love is orderly. It's orderly and it's prudent. Okay. Love has a certain flow to it. Okay. Love isn't all over the place. Love isn't, for lack of a better term, it's not sun-timey. Okay. Love is consistent. Love does have ebb and flows, but overall, it's going to have an order to it. In a way, you can kind of know what to expect from a person when they love you, because they've shown over time that there's going to be an order to what they do. There's going to be an integrity in what they do when it comes to you. Again, they don't just bring you anything, they're going to always bring their best, and it's going to be reflected in what they do, because there's going to be an order to it. There's going to be a flow to it. It's not going to be shambles of different actions that they take and just kind of expect you to just kind of take it. A great example of kind of where we saw orderly love, you actually can see that in Cain and Abel. And we all know the story about Cain and Abel, how Cain ended up killing Abel. But the interesting dynamic is that both Cain and Abel brought an offering to God, but the difference between Cain's offering and Abel's offering, that Cain's was very chaotic. It was just kind of thrown together. And God refused his offering because God said, I don't want you just to take something and just give me anything. Where Abel had given him something that was well put together, it reflected order, it looked strategic, it was intentional. And so God gave the favor of receiving the offering from Abel, because Abel's offering was orderly in that capacity. So that's a great example that we want to look at biblically in terms of, okay, what does that love look like from an orderly perspective, okay? So that's our second characteristic. So don't forget, ask the questions. When have I felt that this was done to me and for me? And when have I done this to others, okay?
Every discipline starts with creating a habit. Find a plan that works for you. I know you can put a reminder in your phone, call so and so in 30 days. You can't use the excuse that, oh, I'm an introvert or I'm an extrovert, stuff people like to say. Nah, if you're not outgoing, right, you better get going because that's the only way networking works.
We are still talking all about the season of fall.
Hey, Miss Kim. Hey, Miss Kim. Hey, Miss Kim, I love you.
Characteristic number 3, love is considerate and generous, okay? Love is always looking to answer whatever the need is of whoever the receiving party is. I was reading in my research the other night just about marriage and relationships, and I saw something that was so moving that I had to literally take my glasses off and kind of lean my head back because the writer had said, love answers the love of another. And that was so powerful because that was saying that love is always being considerate. It is always taking the other person in mind without them having to ask for it. A lot of times when we think of love, we want someone to be mindful of us and to be considerate, to make us feel as if we are a factor and that we matter without it having to be asked. So often in my sessions and a lot of times in my marriage and relationship counseling, I see that one of the biggest struggles is people feel as if their mate is inconsiderate. They feel as if their mate just takes them for granted, as if they're just there and they'll kind of get to them, and it's not really a priority. So oftentimes when people express therapy were loved by my mate, it often comes down to a matter of just simple consideration and simple acts of being generous. How can we show generosity and consideration? How do we spend our time? What type of sacrifices do we make? That's a major, major aspect of love that's right there with consideration is sacrifice as well. So look at the kind of sacrifices that people make for you. Look at the kind of sacrifices that you make for others. And so when you look at this dynamic, again, you want to look at these characteristics and see when have we experienced it, but then also when have we given it to others as well. The fourth characteristic is love has momentum to it because it's ongoing, okay? I read something that I tell my couples often because people, from a pop culture perspective, you hear people often say how you that you date to marry, and I said no, I want to challenge that perspective. You don't date to marry, you marry to date, because when you're talking about marriage and relationship satisfaction, that momentum is so important. You want things to be ongoing. You want your communications to be ongoing. You want your considerations to be ongoing. You want to make certain that year 15 looks just like year one, just minus some of the issues you may have had as you all were kind of onboarding together and learning how to walk together. But there should be an ongoing momentum. There should just be a motion that propels you forward. That you look forward to your conversations. You look forward to those times that you spend together, and making certain that that preservation of that space is so important when you talk about a momentum and having an ongoing love experience. And that's very important. Now, this isn't just applicable to romantic relationships. This is for any relationship where you say, I love my brother, I love my sister, I love my uncle. There has to be a momentum and an ongoing charge that's maintained in that in order to make certain that that love has the ability to keep that motion moving forward and to make certain that people just feel as if they matter, because that's ultimately what it comes down to is, do we feel as if we matter? Do we make people feel as if they matter? Do people feel as if they're just something that has to be scheduled into our lives and scheduled for convenience in that capacity? So that momentum is so critical, and we want to make sure that we maintain that in an ongoing way. The next characteristic is love is fulfilling. Okay. Now, when we say fulfilling, what we're basically saying with this characteristic is that love in and of itself is more than enough to sustain. Okay. I want to talk about kind of the opposite of that, just to give us a better understanding of the power of how love is charged to be fulfilling. Because on the lust side, we talked about how the characteristic of lust is it's impossible to feel. Okay. Meaning that no matter how much you do, it's just not enough. Now, I want to be very careful to tread lightly on this, because a lot of what defines something being enough is just a matter of having a conversation. And that's something that's very important to have. When anybody that you love, you should be having constant and frequent ongoing communication. And a lot of time with the couples that I work with, I have to help them recondition their minds to not take for granted that, you've been together for however long you've been together, or the fact that you're in the same home, because you can just get caught up in going through the motions and the ebb and flow of just being in the same space, but you're not emotionally in the same place. And that takes, being intentional and making certain that we're always checking in with each other to see that each person is fulfilled. One of the things that I always propose is just asking the questions. This is something that I propose to my married couples. I practice this in my own marriage. Just making it a point to, on a regular basis, just ask, how are you? How are we? Is there anything you need from me? Is there anything that I can do better? Are you getting all of your needs met? Are your wants met? And those are some very adult questions to ask. And my hope and prayer is that each relationship has the emotional maturity to be able to receive the answers without taking it personal. But that, again, that's a part of the love definition that we heard in 1 Corinthians 13, 4 through 8, when it talks about how love doesn't keep record of wrong, and that it doesn't delight in evil, nor does it rejoices in, that it rejoices in truth as well. So these are the things that we want to look at and be mindful of as far as the characteristics, and definitely that definition of love that we spoke of earlier. The next characteristic of love, number 6, is peaceful. Love is peaceful. One of the most peaceful experiences you can ever have is when there is a true, authentic love that's in place. It causes you to just have a certain relaxation, even when situations may be troublesome and maybe you just kind of hit a rough patch. It's just that peace of knowing that someone is equally invested in this space as you are. And with that peacefulness, it allows us to be settled. It allows us to look at that particular relationship as a refuge of sorts. It's the one thing that we want to run to. And it's the one thing that we want to be taken. We want to take into consideration regarding how much are we a refuge for. I once read somewhere that it said that the first thing that you think about, or the first place that you go when there's a hard time or difficulty, is often an indication of where you feel or you felt love. And I found that to be very deep and very authentic. When having a bad day, who's the person that you first think of calling? When something happens, that can be scary or even traumatic, who are the first people that you think about calling? And that is an indication of either where you have felt love, or where or indication of a place where you actually feel as if you've had a connection of love to them. Okay, so that's just something to think about and be in consideration of as we talk about the love aspect of the lust versus love psychology.
Well, look, you might not be popular, but my favorite character is Celestial, because
So one of the quotes that I wrote down in the book that kind of stood out to me was, "Love is the enemy of sound judgment."
She seemed like a very needy woman. And I can't even respect Andre, because how do you prey on your friend's wife while he's incarcerated? Like, I just can't get with that. And maybe I got too invested in the book,
Meet the Scam, a simple procedure whose mission is to detect lung cancer early.
I'm here to save you!
But I feel fine.
That's great, but you may still be at high risk for lung cancer.
Oh man, that's a new fence.
If you smoke, early detection could save your life. Learn more at savedbythescan.org.
What's up, y'all? It's your boy Jermaine, Dolly, Mr. Hello, Dolly himself, and guess what? You're tuned in to Tea and Worship with my homies, Mignon and Corey. Keep it out, y'all.
Hey y'all, it's Candy West, and you're watching Tea and Worship with Mignon and Corey.
It's your boy James Fortune, and you are watching my favorite news show, Tea and Worship, with my sis Mignon and Corey.
In the last one, love is always doing something. Love is always doing something. Love isn't passive. Love is active in what it does. It's active in its movement. It's active in its words. Love doesn't say, "Well, you know I love you because you should know." We never want to take for granted the love that anybody has for us, because a lot of times what happens is people just need to hear their love, but then also see it evidenced in the actions that are taken. We want to make sure that the expressions of love that we have verbally match up with what people can see in our actions. It doesn't have to be something grand. It doesn't have to be something expensive. It's just a matter of showing ultimately the investment that we have in those that we love, because we want to make certain that there's no question. One of the things that I tell the husbands that I work with is oftentimes you want to make certain that your wife can look, even when you're not home, and be able to see that she's loved. She's loved. And the reason why I charge love so hard on men is because as husbands, we are charged with the godly responsibility to love. And you'll see that in Ephesians 5:25. God was very particular about what he wanted the husband to do. He said, "Husband, love your wives the way Christ loved the church." Now, sometimes I know my sisters like to stop right there and say, "Well, yeah, God said, love me." But God also tells the sisters to submit. And that's a whole different conversation. We don't have no time to touch with that one. We'll touch on that one maybe later on in the season as far as marriage matters in that capacity. But husbands are charged to love your wives the way Christ loved the church, okay? So for those of you that aren't married, my hope and prayer is that if you're marriage minded, go ahead and start practicing these dynamics in your personal relationships, and then look for these in return, because we want to make sure that we're in a mutually beneficial relationship and that we're equally yoked with an individual. We don't want to be yoked with somebody that has a lust psychology when we're developing a love psychology, because that's going to be a contradicting opposite in and of itself. Okay, now we talked about the legitimacy of love versus lust, and what we want to say so that we can have a better understanding is that love is wanting the legitimate things in legitimate ways. Okay. Now remember, when we talked about lust, we said that lust was when we want legitimate things in illegitimate ways, but love is the complete opposite. We want the right things the right way. Okay. Now let me be uber transparent with you all with this one. One of the things that I know, and this is what I try to stress in my premarital counseling components is that if you know this is the person that you want to be with, and you first and foremost laid it at God's feet, and if you've received that authorization from God, you want to make certain that you are wanting it the right way and going about it the right way to the best of your abilities. One of the things that I truly believe is that when things are decent and in order and godly, He will authorize it and finance it. And I can say that personally that I've been able to experience that in my own experience in my marriage, is that when I saw that this was what God would have me to do and I honored it His way, He has blessed it tremendously. So I'm not just saying something from an aspect of what I think. I'm saying something from the aspect of what I truly know. What I like to tell my patients is I would never tell you to plant a seed in your field that I haven't seen a harvest for in my own. So I can personally attest to the importance of doing things the right way in a godly way, particularly if you say you love it. If you love it, you're going to want to bless it and you want it to be blessed. But you can't say that you love something and you're going to compromise it. So that speaks volumes in terms of the integrity of our relationships. How do we handle disagreements? How can we say we love someone, but then the first time there's signs of trouble, we're turning outward? We're turning away from that person. That's not what love does. Lust does that because lust is just based on the moment. We talked about that characteristic. Love is just based on in the moment. And once that moment is gone, then lust kind of goes on about its business. So it's important to keep that in capacity when it comes to love and understanding that, again, love is wanting the legitimate things in the legitimate ways, and love is wanting the right things the right way. Love says, I want ongoing momentum, not just a moment. When we talked about lust, remember we said how lust just wants the moment. Love says, I want ongoing momentum. I want to be able to build and continue and keep emotion going. It's going to improve us and elevate us on an ongoing basis. So when you look at the differences between lust versus love in the psychology, then we have some real sincere conversations that we really have to have with ourselves, because once you get the information, you're accountable for the information. So it's not just something to have a casual attitude towards. This is something that I really want us to take into consideration. Looking at our relationships, if you're currently involved in a relationship, any kind, if it's a friendship, if it's a romantic relationship, is it really based on love in the biblical definition as well as with the characteristics? Is it chaotic? If it's chaotic, that's a demonstration of lust. If it's orderly, then this is a characteristic of love. So there's contrast here for us to compare and look at and really have some adult conversations with ourselves, because now that we have the information, if we continue to move forward in the way that we have, and whatever the situations may yield or whatever the consequences, it's kind of hard to blame somebody else when we had the information, but we just didn't have the activation that we needed because we were hesitant for whatever reasons. So it's important to be able to take this information and be able to pray over it, ask God to show you throughout the process, and He will. He will. So that's what we have for today. So we've gone over the psychology of lust versus love. We had the lust edition in the last episode, and today we have the love edition. So we've been able to compare and contrast. We've talked about the characteristics. We've talked about the definition. So you've been given some very solid tools to look at. My hope and prayer is that you actually will apply them, because we want wisdom. And here at Sound Mind, what we say about wisdom. We say that you get the knowledge, and then the understanding comes from you taking the knowledge and seeing how it applies to you as an individual. But then we go on to wisdom, because we actually apply the understanding that we have in order to get wisdom. We activate it, we execute it. Okay. So that's it for this episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. We love the support. We thank you for the growing audience that you all are contributing to us having here at Hope TV and on Sound Mind. And as always, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May He make His face shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May He bless you when you're going out and you're coming in. May He bless you with shalom peace, that you be at peace with yourself, that you be at peace with others, but most importantly, that you be at peace with God. I'm Jay Gideon Winfrey, licensed therapist, and this has been another episode of Sound Mind, and we will see you on next week. But remember, sound doctrine leads to sound mind, okay? Take care. We love you. We'll do it again next week.
Why do you think these men don't want to get married?
It really depends on an individual's why we're getting married. A lot of the things that make a man good are kind of intangible. And his credit score shouldn't be the metric for what makes him good.